Rain hammered the tin roof of my grandfather's cabin, drumming like a warning I should have listened to weeks ago. The ridge was quiet, too quiet, except for the low hum of my generator and the faint crackle of the security cameras on the feed. I leaned over the glowing screens, sipping lukewarm coffee, and froze. Two black SUVs crept up the narrow dirt road, tires churning through the mud, headlights slicing through the fog. No plates. No hesitation. They weren't lost. I reached for the winch control by instinct, ready to tighten the chain that locked the gate at the base of the hill. That's when Tess appeared on the porch, clutching her sweater, her voice trembling. "Cole, they're back." I didn't ask who. I grabbed my grandfather's old rifle from the rack by the door and stepped out into the cold rain. The metallic tang of wet earth filled the air, sharp and grounding, as I took position behind the truck. The SUVs stopped just short of the gate. Four men stepped out, all in matching dark suits, their boots polished like they'd never seen dirt before. One of them, tall, sharp-jawed, carrying himself like a man who owned everything his eyes touched, walked right up to the fence. "You're trespassing," I called out, my voice steady despite the thundering in my chest. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "No, Mr. Walker, you are." The rain slicked off my rifle barrel. "You want to test that theory?" His smile widened just enough to make my stomach knot. "This land isn't yours anymore. And soon, neither is this ridge." Behind me, Tess whispered, "Cole." I didn't take my eyes off him. "Get inside," I said quietly. "Lock the door." Because I knew then, standing there in the rain with my finger tight on the trigger, that this wasn't over. The fight for my grandfather's ridge had just begun. The storm had rolled in fast, like the mountain had breathed it down from its peaks just to make a point. Wind howled through the tall pines, their shadows thrashing across the muddy ground as sheets of rain blurred the ridgeline. I stood on the porch of my grandfather's old cabin, watching the trees sway and listening to the distant rumble of thunder. The ridge had always been quiet, peaceful, untouched. But tonight, the quiet had a tension to it, like the land itself knew trouble was on the way. I ran a hand over the rough wood of the porch railing, tracing grooves carved decades ago when my grandfather had built this place with his own hands. He'd fought his whole life to keep this ridge free from developers, corporations, and anyone who thought they could tame it. I thought those battles had ended when he passed it down to me. I thought wrong. It started with letters from the Sable Ridge Homeowners Association, an HOA I never joined, never agreed to, and never recognized. The first ones were polite, offering community guidelines and development opportunities. Then they became demands. They said my grandfather's land wasn't properly documented and that portions of it were being rezoned for community growth. And then came the boldest move yet, a listing on a real estate website showing my cabin as for sale. I'd laughed the first time I saw it. The laugh didn't last. 2 days later, I found strangers parked on the road below the ridge, taking pictures like tourists at a lookout. A week after that, survey markers started appearing at the edge of my property, bright orange flags staked in the mud like little claims of conquest. I ripped them up, but more came back. And then, tonight, the sound came. A deep mechanical roar rose from the road below, carried up the slope with the storm. I knew that sound. A big truck, a powerful one. I killed the cab. In lights, grabbed the binoculars, and stepped out onto the porch. Through the sheets of rain, I caught a flash of chrome and headlights cutting through the trees. A Ford F-350 Super Duty, black, lifted, roaring up the incline. Behind it, another black SUV crept like a shadow, its headlights dimmed. Not tourists, not neighbors. I ducked back inside, locked the door, and hit the switch on the floodlights. The cabin yard lit up like midday, every corner of my property glowing under hard white light. The rain turned silver in the beams. I could see everything now. The gate, the driveway, the muddy ruts already carved into the road. "Cole!" Tess's voice came from the loft upstairs. She was leaning over the railing, her red hair pulled back, worry etched across her face. "What is it?" "Company," I said, pulling my jacket on. She hesitated, biting her lip. "HOA?" I nodded. "Do we call Paige?" "Already did." I tapped the radio, clipped to my belt. "She's watching the county recorder system for anything new." If they filed something, we'll know. I grabbed the remote for the security system and headed down into the basement. This wasn't some paranoid prepper's hideout. It was a necessity. I'd spent the last 2 years quietly turning this place into a fortress, not because I wanted a fight, but because I knew one would come. My grandfather had warned me, the ridge draws wolves, Cole. Be ready. On the basement wall, an array of monitors flickered to life, pulling up feeds from cameras hidden in birdhouses, fence posts, and even hollowed-out logs. I caught sight of the truck nosing up to my main gate, a massive wrought iron thing my grandfather and I had set in concrete 20 years ago. The F-350's headlights glared against it. 4 men climbed out. 2 wore dark suits under slick raincoats, the kind of guys who normally deal in conference rooms, not mud. The other 2, bigger, heavier, wore tactical vests under their jackets. Security muscle. And then there was the woman. Even from the camera feed, I recognized the expensive umbrella, the tailored raincoat, and the sharp, deliberate walk. Karen Sunshire, HOA president, self-appointed queen of Sable Ridge. I leaned closer to the microphone and switched on the exterior speakers. "You're trespassing," I said, my voice booming out into the storm. "Turn around now." Karen didn't flinch. She tilted her umbrella against the wind and stepped right up to the gate. Her voice carried sharp and clear through the rain. "This property is under the jurisdiction of the Sable Ridge Homeowners Association," she declared, holding up a folder as though it were a royal decree. "You've ignored repeated notices, and now we're here to secure the property." I stared at her through the screen, calm and cold. "Try it," I said. Behind her, one of the security guys unclipped something from his belt. This wasn't going to be a polite conversation. The rain came harder, hammering the tin roof above me, but the sound outside was louder, the heavy idle of the F-350 growling like some caged animal waiting for a signal to charge. Through the camera feeds, I watched Karen hand a folded document to one of the suited men. He nodded and stepped toward the gate, pulling something from a waterproof case. I switched camera angles, zooming in on the paper. An eviction notice. It was fake. I knew it immediately. The county recorder's watermark was missing, and the signature block at the bottom was a scanned copy of an old probate judge's name, a judge who'd retired 5 years ago. These weren't amateurs, though. They were testing me, trying to see if I'd fold without a faux pas. I grabbed the thumb drive already loaded in the side of the main console and plugged it into the system. It contained every county document, plat map, and deed tied to this property, all verified and cross-referenced with the state database. My grandfather's name, my name. No HOA jurisdiction, no pending sales. This wasn't just a cabin. This was legacy land, grandfathered out of zoning ordinances before the HOA even existed. Still, they were counting on fear. Most people would see a legal document and panic, but I wasn't most people. "Cole!" Tess called from upstairs again, her voice tighter now. "They're cutting something." I flipped the camera feed to the left side of the gate. One of the security guys had pulled out bolt cutters, massive jaws glinting wet under the floodlights. The other was covering him with a hand on his hip, fingers tapping the grip of what I could only assume was a concealed weapon. I took a slow breath and hit the switch on the panel. Outside, a high-pitched siren wailed to life, shrieking across the ridge and bouncing between the trees like an angry ghost. The bolt cutter guy flinched, dropped the tool, and stepped back. The other reached for his hip, but froze when a red dot bloomed on his chest. From my perch, I eased the hunting rifle against my shoulder and whispered into the speaker, "Don't." Through the camera feed, I watched the man hesitate, glance at Karen, and slowly raise his hands. The other followed suit. Even Karen stiffened but held her ground. "Enough of this nonsense," she barked over the siren. "Cole, you're in violation of zoning ordinances and obstructing authorized development. We have every right to—" I cut her off, switching to the external floodlight controls. One by one, additional lights flickered to life across the property, mounted on posts, trees, and the cabin itself. In seconds, the entire ridge's top glowed under blinding white beams. Shadows vanished. The rain turned into a sheet of liquid fire. "You have no right here," I said through the speakers, slow and deliberate. "This is private property. You want to test that in court? Be my guest. But you step 1 foot past that gate, and you're going to regret it. Karen turned to whisper something to the suited man beside her. He frowned, shook his head slightly, and then glanced nervously at the camera mounted above the gate. That's when I saw it click for them. They knew they were being recorded. And that's when I heard it. The low growl of another engine approaching from behind them. Through the far camera feed, headlights bobbed up the muddy road. At first, I thought it was another SUV, maybe more of Karen's people. But as the beams swung wide, I spotted the shape of the county sheriff's truck. Relief washed over me in an instant. I picked up the radio, switching to Paige's private channel. "That you?" Her voice came through, calm and measured. "Yep. Deputy Miller's on site. I sent him the packet." I smiled for the first time that night. Paige never missed. The sheriff's truck rolled up slow, stopping just behind Karen's SUV. Deputy Miller stepped out, hat pulled low against the rain, one hand resting on his holster. He scanned the scene in silence, the chained gate, the SUV, the muscle, Karen with her folder of lies. Then he spotted the rifle barrel angled from my porch and gave me the slightest nod. Karen straightened, suddenly less certain. "Deputy, thank goodness you're here. This man is—" Miller raised a hand, cutting her off. "Ma'am, I got an email tonight, very thorough one. County Recorder's Office, fraudulent filings, forged surveys." He glanced at her security team. "Might want to rethink your position here." One of her muscle guys shifted uneasily. The other took a deliberate step away from her. Karen's confidence faltered, but she tried to recover. "This is a misunderstanding." "It usually is," Miller said flatly, reaching for his radio. "Cole, sit tight. We'll handle this." I leaned against the railing, rifle still in hand but pointed low. The ridge had always been mine. Tonight, it finally felt like someone else believed it too. But I knew Karen. She wasn't going down without a fight. The rain slowed to a steady drizzle, but the tension didn't ease. Karen stood there, drenched in her expensive coat, clutching the fake eviction notice like it was a shield. Behind her, the investors whispered furiously to each other, their umbrellas trembling in their hands. They were starting to realize this wasn't the clean deal Karen had promised them. Deputy Miller adjusted his hat and stepped closer, boots sinking into the mud. "All right," he said evenly. "Let's get a few things straight. Nobody's crossing that gate until I see permits, court orders, or something real with a judge's stamp on it." Karen's jaw tightened. "We have them," she snapped, lifting the folder higher. "I'll show you." Miller held up a hand. "Not here. You know the drill. We'll sort this at the courthouse." That set off one of the investors, a tall man with a waxed mustache and a suit that was absolutely ruined by the rain. "Courthouse?" he barked. "Karen, you said all the filings were clean. You said the HOA had jurisdiction. You promised—" "Calm down," Karen hissed through clenched teeth, but the damage was done. The other investor, shorter and rounder, took a cautious step backward, eyeing Miller like he was their lifeline. I watched all of it from the porch, one hand on the rifle, the other resting on the railing. Tess had joined me now, wrapped in a blanket, her damp hair sticking to her cheeks. She stood silent, but I could feel her heartbeat thundering through the fabric pressed against my arm. "Paige, you catching this?" I muttered into the radio. Her voice crackled back, cheerful despite the tension. "Loud and clear. Everything's streaming to the county server right now. And Cole, that judge's packet I sent earlier, it's already in Miller's inbox. Karen's done." I smiled grimly. She doesn't know it yet. Down below, Miller turned toward Karen, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. Now." For the first time all night, Karen hesitated. Her security detail shifted uncomfortably. One of them, the younger guy, slowly reached up and disabled the bolt cutters still hanging uselessly from the gate chain. The other, older one, kept his hand close to his hip. But he didn't draw. He wasn't stupid. "Deputy," Karen said, her voice softer now but still sharp, "this is private business. You have no jurisdiction here." Miller gave a short laugh that wasn't remotely friendly. "Lady, when you file fraudulent documents with the county and try to evict a man at gunpoint in the middle of the night, it stops being private real quick." There it was, the first crack in her armor. The taller investor finally lost it. "Evict? Gunpoint?" He turned on Karen, jabbing a finger into her chest. "What the hell did you drag us into?" Karen whipped around, snarling under her breath, but her voice was too low to hear over the rain. The shorter investor glanced at Miller and raised his hands. "Deputy, we didn't know. We were misled. I've got nothing to do with this." Miller looked him over, then at the taller man. "You two might want to stick around. You're going to need statements. DA's going to have questions." Karen tried to protest, but the younger security guard suddenly raised both hands in surrender. "I'm done," he announced loudly. "I was hired for site security, that's it. She told us the owner was squatting illegally. I didn't sign up for felonies." That flipped a switch. The older guard swore under his breath, muttering something about not going down for this, and slowly backed away from Karen's side. I leaned toward Tess, whispering, "That's two fewer people I need to worry about." She clutched the blanket tight. And whispered back, "This is really happening, isn't it?" "Yeah," I said softly. "It's happening." Then Karen did something I didn't expect. She straightened her shoulders, tossed the ruined eviction notice into the mud, and fixed me with a glare so sharp it could have cut glass. "This isn't over, Cole. You think one deputy and a few floodlights are going to stop Sable Ridge? You think you've won?" I didn't respond. Didn't need to. Because at that exact moment, Miller's radio crackled, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Unit 2, be advised," a voice said. "County Recorder's Office confirms fraudulent plats and easements. Emergency injunction's been issued. All filings are void. Repeat, null and void." Miller clipped the radio back to his vest and gave Karen the faintest shrug. "Sounds over to me." The investors stared at her like she'd just pulled them off a cliff. The younger guard exhaled audibly. Tess squeezed my arm. But I knew Karen. People like her didn't just give up. And sure enough, her gaze hardened and she leaned toward the older guard, the one still hovering near his hip. I didn't like where that was going. I slid the safety off my rifle and whispered to Tess, "Get inside, now." Tess hesitated when I told her to get inside, her wide eyes flicking between me and the group at the gate. But when she saw Karen lean toward the older security guard, she nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around herself before disappearing back into the cabin. The door clicked softly behind her. I adjusted my grip on the rifle, steady but ready. The air had shifted, the rain slowed, but the tension felt thicker, heavier, like the ridge itself was holding its breath. Deputy Miller must have sensed it too, because his hand drifted closer to the holster at his hip. "Ma'am," he warned, his voice sharp enough to cut through the drizzle. "Don't even think about it." Karen's lips curved into the faintest smirk. "Think about what, Deputy?" she asked, her tones syrupy sweet, the kind of voice snakes use right before they strike. Before anyone could move, the older security guard twitched, just a slight shift, his hand grazing the grip of his pistol. That's when everything erupted. "Don't!" Miller barked, his voice like a shotgun blast. His weapon was out before the older guard even cleared leather. The younger guard froze instantly, both hands shooting into the air, his wide-eyed stare screaming that he wanted no part of this. The investors, pale as ghosts, stumbled backward into the mud, one of them nearly falling on his face. Karen, though, she didn't flinch. Not once. Instead, she raised her chin defiantly as if daring Miller to act. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she hissed. "Sable Ridge Minerals has attorneys who—" Miller cut her off, his voice steady but cold. "Lady, the only attorney you'll be talking to tonight is the one who explains how many years you're looking at." I slowly stepped off the porch, boots sinking into the wet earth, keeping the rifle trained low but ready. "Karen," I said calmly, "this is over. You can walk out of here on your own, or Miller can drag you. But either way, you're done." For the first time, real uncertainty flickered in her eyes. It was brief, just a spark, but I caught it. Paige's voice crackled through my earpiece right on cue. "Cole, we got it. Judge signed the injunction. Every single document Karen filed is legally dead. Sheriff's office confirmed it. It's over." I raised my voice so everyone could hear. "You hear that, Karen? The fake plats, the forged easements, the shell companies, all gone. You've got nothing." The taller investor groaned loudly, dragging his hands down his soaked face. "Oh my God, I'm ruined." "Ruined?" The shorter investor rounded on him, voice sharp and panicked. "You're ruined? She told us this was bulletproof. She said everything was legit." "She lied," the taller one snapped, his voice cracking. "And now we're accessories." Karen glared at them both, her control over the situation slipping like mud under boots. "Shut up," she snarled. "All of you, shut up. Nobody's ruined. Nobody's going to jail." But even as she said it, the older guard, the one still standing beside her, slowly lowered his weapon hand, letting his pistol drop into the mud with a soft, wet thud. "I'm not dying for you," he said flatly. "I'm done." Karen spun on him, eyes blazing. "Pick that up!" He shook his head and backed away, hands raised. "Nope. You didn't pay me enough for this. I've got a family." That was the breaking point. Deputy Miller stepped forward, voice firm and final. "Karen Sunshire, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, filing falsified documents, attempted illegal eviction, and trespassing." He reached for the cuffs, but Karen stepped back instinctively, shoes sinking into the mud. "You can't do this," she screamed, her voice finally cracking. "This isn't how this ends." "Oh, this is exactly how it ends," Miller replied, snapping the cold steel cuffs onto her wrists. The ratcheting click of metal locking in place was loud, louder than the rain, louder than the quiet sob of the taller investor, louder than the wind whistling through the pines. Karen froze. For the first time all night, she had no words. As Miller read her rights, the investors slumped against the side of the F-350, looking like their world had collapsed. The younger guard leaned against the gate, staring blankly into the mud. The older guard kicked at his dropped pistol, muttering curses under his breath. Page's voice came back through the earpiece, softer this time. "It's done, Cole. The DA's office is already building the case. She's finished." I exhaled slowly, my grip on the rifle loosening for the first time in hours, but I knew better than to relax. This battle, it was over. But Karen had money, influence, and friends in high places, and people like her didn't go quietly. I turned and looked up at the ridge, rain sliding off the brim of my hat. The war wasn't done. Not yet. The rain slowed to a fine mist, turning the mud into a slick mess that clung to our boots. The flashing blue lights from the deputy's cruiser cut sharp beams through the thinning fog, painting the pines in eerie hues. Karen sat slumped in the back seat, cuffs glinting beneath the beam of Miller's flashlight. She wasn't shouting anymore. She wasn't even glaring. She just stared straight ahead, lips pressed tight, breathing shallow. The investors huddled together under the open tailgate of their SUV, whispering frantically. Every so often, one of them would glance at me with a mixture of resentment and relief, like they couldn't decide whether to hate me or thank me. "Cole," Miller said, pulling me aside. His voice was low, meant for me alone. "I'll need your full statement, everything. The gate footage, the casings, copies of the plats. DA's office wants this airtight." "I've got everything queued," I replied, tapping the portable drive clipped to my belt. "Gate footage, audio logs, everything from the generator hub, timestamps match." Miller nodded, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You made it a lot easier tonight, Cole. Could have gone real bad otherwise." I glanced back at the gate, the heavy F-350 still chained across the entrance, the winch cable taut like a drawn bowstring. "It almost did," I admitted. From the porch, Tess stepped out again, now wrapped in a dry flannel shirt and my old Carhartt jacket. She leaned against the railing, exhaustion written across her face. When our eyes met, she gave me the faintest smile, the kind that carried equal parts relief and disbelief. Paige's name lit up my phone again. I put her on speaker so Tess could hear. "You're going to love this," Paige said, her voice practically humming with adrenaline. "The DA's forensic team just finished a preliminary sweep. Karen's offshore accounts froze. In Sable Ridge Minerals is officially defunct. The injunction wiped every single one of her filings off the books. Legally, it's like she never touched this land." Tess let out a long breath she'd been holding for weeks, maybe months. "So, it's over?" she asked cautiously. Paige hesitated for half a beat. "It's over for Karen," she said carefully. "But Cole, this stirred up a hornet's nest. Those investors? They'll flip on her, sure, but they're not innocent victims here. They're sharks, and sharks without a meal get mean." I rubbed a hand over my jaw, staring out at the wrecked front yard. Deep tire ruts cutting through the wet grass, the broken gate leaning like a drunk. Let them try, I muttered. I mean it, Paige pressed. They've got lawyers, Cole, and deep pockets. This was round one. You won tonight, but don't think they're just going to slink away quietly. Tess moved closer, resting a hand on my arm. Then we stay ready, she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. Miller returned, radio crackling faintly at his shoulder. Tow truck's on its way, he said. We'll impound the SUV, get those shell documents to the evidence locker, and book the weapons. I'll need you at the station first thing in the morning, Cole. I'll be there, I replied, my voice flat. Karen finally moved, turning her head just enough to meet my gaze through the cruiser's rear window. Her expression had shifted, no longer rage, no longer arrogance. It was something colder, calculated. Even in cuffs, she was plotting. I held her stare until Miller slid into the driver's seat and pulled away, the cruiser's headlights carving two bright paths down the wet road. The sound of the tires faded into the mist, leaving behind only the steady drip of water from the pines and the quiet hum of the generator. For a long moment, Tess and I just stood there in silence. Finally, she said, "It feels too quiet." I nodded slowly. "That's because it's not over. Quiet's just the pause before the next move." Paige's voice came softly through the speaker, as if she were thinking the same thing. "Cole, keep your head on a swivel. You cut off one head of this thing tonight, but there's more where that came from. And these people, they don't forgive. They regroup." I looked out toward the ridge, where the land rolled away into misty darkness. Dense pines hiding secrets older than any deed or plat map. "This land's been in my family for 3 generations," I said. "I'm not giving it up. Not to them, not to anyone." Tess slipped her hand into mine. "Then we fight," she whispered. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled faintly, even though the storm had passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling it was a warning. Morning crept in slow, the pale light bleeding through the thinning mist like the first exhale after a long fight. The storm had passed, but the battlefield remained. My boots sank into the churned-up mud as I walked the perimeter, surveying the damage with a steaming mug of coffee in one hand and my phone in the other. The gate was wrecked beyond a quick fix. The steel posts leaned at crooked angles, the chain bent where the F-350 had been anchored during the standoff. Tire tracks carved deep scars into the earth, slicing through the front yard like wounds that would take time to heal. Tess came out onto the porch, barefoot, holding her own mug. Her hair was still damp from the shower, tied back loosely, but there were dark circles under her eyes. She wrapped my old flannel tighter around herself as she watched me. "It looks worse in daylight," she said quietly. "Yeah," I replied, scanning the mess. "But it's ours." The simple truth of that settled over us like the soft fog rolling back in from the ridge. My phone buzzed again. Paige, of course. I answered, putting her on speaker so Tess could hear. "You're going to love this one," Paige said, skipping any greeting. Her voice was sharp, full of controlled energy. "Karen folded like wet cardboard in her holding cell last night. DA's office sent me the report. She started talking before she even asked for a lawyer." Tess raised an eyebrow. "That doesn't sound like her." Paige gave a short laugh. "Felony charges and no one left to back her up? Even snakes know when they're cornered. She's throwing everyone under the bus. The investors, the security contractors, even her own lawyers. Every email, every contract, every offshore account. We're talking full cooperation to cut her sentence." I took a long sip of coffee, letting the bitterness anchor me. "So she's officially done." "Oh, she's finished," Paige confirmed. "Her accounts are frozen, the shell company's dissolved, and Sable Ridge Minerals doesn't exist anymore. Not legally, anyway. The injunction nullified the fraudulent filings overnight. The DA's calling it one of the cleanest takedowns of a property scam they've seen in years." Tess exhaled slowly, shoulders loosening for the first time in weeks. "So, we won." Paige hesitated. "You won this round," she corrected softly. "But Cole, those investors? They're not going down with her. They're already trying to cut deals of their own. These people aren't amateurs. They've got teams of lawyers sharpening knives as we speak. You stopped Karen, but you exposed their whole operation in the process. That makes you a liability." I set the mug down on the porch railing and rubbed the bridge of my nose. "Good," I said finally. Let them come. We're ready now. Paige didn't sound convinced. Just promise me you'll be careful, Cole. These aren't HOA busybodies anymore. These are sharks. And sharks don't forgive. They circle back. Noted, I said simply, ending the call. Tess came down the steps, boots unlaced and dangling from one hand. Paige is right, you know, she said softly. They won't just walk away from this. I nodded, watching the fog shift over the ridge like smoke curling off a battlefield. I know, I said, but we've got something they don't. What's that? She asked. I looked out toward the rolling hills, the dense forest, and the silver shimmer of the lake in the distance. Roots, I said. This isn't just land to us. It's home. It's history. That's a fight they'll never win. For a moment, silence settled between us, broken only by the soft drip of rainwater from the eaves and the distant calls of morning birds. Then, from down the road, I heard the rumble of engines, multiple engines. I turned sharply, narrowing my eyes at the bend where the gravel path disappeared into the mist. Tess noticed my posture stiffen. "Please tell me that's the neighbors coming to help," she murmured. It wasn't. A black SUV rolled into view first, followed by another, both spotless despite the mud-slicked road. No license plates. Windows tinted deep. I felt my jaw tighten. "Spoke too soon," I muttered, setting my mug down carefully and checking the weight of the sidearm holstered at my hip. Tess stepped closer to me instinctively. "Cole." "Stay behind me," I said quietly. The SUVs came to a stop just short of the destroyed gate. 4 men stepped out, dressed in sharp suits that didn't belong anywhere near a muddy mountain road. They weren't holding weapons, but they didn't need to. Everything about them screamed intent. One of them, a tall man with slicked back hair and a polished smile, raised his hands in mock peace. "Mr. Walker," he called out, his voice smooth as silk, "we're here to talk." I didn't move. "Then start talking." He smiled wider. "About the ridge," he said simply, "and about how this little misunderstanding can still work out in everyone's favor." Behind me, Tess whispered, "I thought you said it was over." I kept my eyes on the suited men, the fog curling around their legs like ghosts. "So did I said under my breath. But looking at them now, I knew Paige had been right. This wasn't over, not even close. The 4 men stood there like statues, their polished shoes sinking slightly into the mud, but they didn't seem to care. The tall one with the slicked back hair kept his hands folded loosely in front of him, perfectly calm, like a man who already knew how the conversation would end. Behind him, the other 3 fanned out subtly, surveying the wreckage of my gate, the broken chain, the tire ruts carved deep into the earth. Their eyes lingered on the private property, not for sale sign still nailed to the post. One of them smirked faintly, as if amused by my defiance. I stepped forward just enough to close the distance between us without crossing the invisible line of my boundary. "You've got 5 minutes," I said flatly. "Say what you came to say." The tall man's smile never faltered. "Straight to business. I like that." He reached into his coat slowly, deliberately, producing a slim leather folder. He held it up between 2 fingers, like a peace offering. "My name's Victor Dane," he said smoothly. "I represent parties with residual interests in the Sable Ridge development. You've made things complicated for them, Mr. Walker." Tess shifted behind me, just enough that I could sense her tension. "Complicated," I echoed, my tone dry. "You mean you got caught?" Victor's smile widened a fraction. "Caught isn't the right word. Karen was overzealous, sloppy even. She let personal ambition cloud good business sense. But her mistakes don't have to define the future. There's still an opportunity here for everyone." I folded my arms, not interested. He tilted his head, pretending to be disappointed, but clearly expecting the response. "You haven't even heard the offer yet." "I don't need to," I said. "You came up here in your shiny black SUVs, on private property, less than 12 hours after one of your people was arrested for fraud, and legal filings. You think you're going to smooth this over with a check?" Victor chuckled, deep and smooth. "Everyone has a number, Mr. Walker." I stepped closer until I could see my reflection in his sunglasses. "Not me." For the first time, his smile faltered, only slightly, but enough for me to see the edge of frustration hiding behind the polish. He slipped the folder open and produced a single sheet of paper, holding it out like a magician revealing a card. This isn't a buyout, he said softly. This is a settlement agreement. Sign this, and the litigation that's already being drafted against you goes away. No countersuits, no claims of obstruction, no property disputes dragging you through court for the next 5 years. You keep your land. We walk away clean. Tess whispered behind me, "They're bluffing." I didn't answer her. I just stared at the paper, letting the silence stretch. Victor took my pause as a sign of interest. "You're smart enough to know what fighting us looks like. Deep pockets, endless lawyers, tied-up courts. You've won one battle, Mr. Walker, but you don't want the war." I finally looked up at him. "You're right about one thing," I said evenly. "I don't want the war." Relief flickered across his face, a fraction too soon. "But," I continued, stepping forward until I was within arm's reach, "I didn't start it, and if you bring it to my door again, I'll finish it. You tell your residual parties the ridge isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." Victor studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed, slipping the folder back into his coat. "Stubborn," he said finally, his voice almost admiring. "I respect that." He turned to leave, but paused halfway back to the SUV. "Just remember something, Mr. Walker." His tone had cooled, the silk replaced with steel. "Karen was a pawn. The people I work for, they don't lose, and they don't forget." I watched as the four men climbed back into their spotless vehicles, engines growling softly in the mist. Within seconds, they were gone, swallowed by the winding road and the lingering fog. Tess stepped up beside me, arms wrapped tight around herself. "That didn't sound like a threat at all," she muttered sarcastically. I kept my eyes on the empty road. "It was a promise," I said quietly. From the ridge, the quiet felt heavier now, like the calm before a second storm. The fight with Karen had been personal. This one was going to be different. Bigger, colder, smarter. Paige was right. I'd kicked over a hornet's nest, and while Karen had fallen, the real players were still out there circling. I took a long breath, tasting the damp pine in the air, letting the weight of it settle in my bones. "They're not going to stop," Tess whispered. "No," I agreed softly, "but neither are we." Behind us, the wrecked gate leaned drunkenly, battered but still standing. A symbol, a warning, and, if need be, a challenge. The sun had climbed higher by the time I'd patched the generator back together and reset the cameras. The fog thinned, burning off in slow curls that revealed the ridgeline in all its battered beauty. It was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, one earned, not given. Tess brought me another cup of coffee, her hand lingering on mine for just a second longer than necessary. "You didn't tell me," she said softly. "About what?" "That they'd come back, that there'd be more." Her voice was steady, but I heard the undercurrent of worry. I looked out over the ridge, following the winding trail of tire ruts the SUVs had carved into my land. "I wasn't sure until today," I admitted. "Karen was just the surface. She thought she was pulling the strings, but she was just dancing on someone else's stage." Tess tightened her blanket around her shoulders, staring at the jagged skyline where the tree line met the morning sky. "And now?" "Now we prepare?" I said simply. "We patch the gate, reset the posts, keep the cameras rolling. Paige digs deeper into whatever's left of Sable Ridge minerals. We make sure the law is on our side, all the way this time." The phone buzzed in my pocket. Paige again. "You saw them, didn't you?" she said without preamble. "Four men, black SUVs, polished boots," I confirmed. "Their front man called himself Victor Dane." Paige cursed under her breath. "That's bad news, Cole. Real bad. I've been digging since the arrest. Sable Ridge wasn't just Karen's brainchild. It's tied to a web of companies that all point back to a holding group in Houston. Oil money. Deep oil money." "How deep?" I asked. "Bottomless," she said grimly. "And the thing about people with money like that, they don't give up just because a county sheriff slapped handcuffs on their pawn. If they sent Victor, it means they're already working the next angle." I leaned against the porch railing, letting her words sink in. The fight wasn't over. Far from it. Karen had been the storm front. The real hurricane was still out at sea, gathering strength. "You sound worried," I said quietly. I am, Paige admitted, but that doesn't mean we're helpless. I'm talking to the DA this afternoon. We're pushing for a full injunction against any new filings tied to the Ridge until the fraud case wraps. And Cole? Yeah? Don't meet them alone next time. I glanced at Tess, who was pretending not to eavesdrop, but failing miserably. Wasn't exactly planned, I said dryly. Planned or not, they tested you today, Paige said. And now they know you won't bend. That means the next move won't be polite. Be ready. I hung up, sliding the phone back into my pocket. Tess stepped closer, her shoulder brushing mine. She's right, isn't she? Yeah, I said, she's right. For a long moment, we just stood there, staring out at the ridge. The air smelled clean and sharp after the night storm, but underneath it, I could almost taste the tension, metallic and cold. Then, faintly, the sound of chainsaws drifted up the road. I turned and saw 3 trucks pulling up just beyond the ruined gate. Neighbors piled out, carrying tools, shovels, and lengths of heavy chain. Eli was among them, the same man who'd once complained about my security lights. He gave me a sheepish wave. Figured we'd help clear the tree, he said. Owe you that much. I nodded, surprised by the tightness in my throat. Appreciate it, I managed. Within minutes, the roar of chainsaws filled the air, drowning out the echoes of last night's chaos. Together we rolled the fallen pine aside, straightened the leaning posts, and started laying the foundation for a stronger gate. As I worked alongside them, sweat mixing with the damp morning air, something shifted. This wasn't just my fight anymore. The ridge wasn't just my responsibility. It belonged to all of us. Everyone who'd chosen to live here. Everyone who wanted to keep it untouched and untamed. By the time the sun sat high above the treetops, the fallen pine was gone, the mud smoothed, and the new posts were set in place. Tess handed me a fresh sign, one I'd carved myself late last night while the adrenaline still burned in my veins. Private property, not for sale, no exceptions. I drove the last nail in and stepped back, wiping my hands on my jeans. The sign stood straight and unyielding, a single line in the dirt against forces much larger than us. Tess slipped her hand into mine. Do you think they'll come back? She asked. I looked out over the ridge, letting the silence settle deep into my bones. Yeah, I said finally. They will. She squeezed my hand tighter. And when they do? I smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach my eyes. Then we'll be ready. Somewhere beyond the horizon, powerful men were already drawing up new plans, whispering in boardrooms, mapping out new angles. But here, on this ridge, on this land my grandfather walked, we'd drawn our own laissez. And in this time, we weren't standing alone. The ridge was ours, for now, and for as long as we had the strength to defend it.